Welcome back to Bending the Narrative. Each week, we dive into Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender live action series. While you can find our overall thoughts of the season in our first episode, throughout book one, we will be discussing in further detail how each episode compares to the live action counterpart. Since this episode is cut from the live action series entirely, we're going to discuss the importance of this episode in the narrative and how its exclusion from the live action series affects that story. Kate, let's start with you.
What I think, that's what I gotta say.
It's rough.
It's rough. But I think this episode is very important. And like we talked about before, a big thing that this show does is it shows how war affects a nation from the smallest little bits to the overall bit, I guess.
The full scope of it, I guess.
The full scope of it, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think missing out on this episode and missing out on this is missing out. I said that so many times, but we're losing out on so many character moments, so many world building moments. It's a great episode to help us understand why and how this works. And when you're like, okay, but how did the Fire Nation take over these people with superpowers? How did this one superpower outdo all of these people? And this is one of those things that shows you like, oh, this is how they did it, with innovation, with new weapons, with metal, with like, they're actually pretty smart. And while we do see soldiers that are stupid, we see that their tactics are very harsh, very creative, using metal, using ships, using fear, kidnapping their loved ones and threatening them, using prison labor to make coal for them, to make them even more powerful. We don't get that at all in a live action show. I don't even think we know why the Fire Nation is bad in the live action show, except we see in the beginning of that, which episode was it? I think it was the King of Omasho episode with Azula, where she is in the group of Earth Kingdom Rebellion and she helps them get in, but it's just and turns on them.
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where that the live action show does telling instead of showing, where the animated show shows you the ways in which the Fire Nation is this huge oppressive. It shows the engine of war and how it operates on every level and how it's a systematic takeover of these people and their culture and their land and their resources and their spirit, and it just breaks them. And you lose all of that emphasis in the world building, like you were saying, where there's a lot of little things here that help and make the world feel more real and like a genuine situation. Whereas, like you're saying, like you see in this why the Fire Nation is so bad, and you see why they're so bad in a different way than just, well, they're bad guys who are throwing fire at our protagonist, right?
Yeah.
Like they're separating families, they're abusing their power in every way that they can. And you see that versus in the live action show, we're just told the Fire Nation is bad because the Fire Nation is bad. Aside from the one very blatant Azula leading a group of people to the palace to get burned, which is the most like overt way you could possibly show.
But like we only see it in the castle. We don't see Azula and the Fire Lord leave the walls of that castle until the end of the last episode.
Yeah.
Like, what do they do? How do they affect the world if they're just in there?
And that's another problem of like show, because like one, you don't even see, like you see Ozai so much in the live action show, and he's just doing a bunch of nothing. Which doesn't make him super formidable, one. But then it also, it just undermines like the emphasis on, like you were saying, it's like you can show the incompetence of all of these foot soldiers and even the commanders and the captains and the wardens or whatever, and you can show how not effective they are, but because of the machine that they're a part of, because of the system of the Fire Nation and its imperial strength, like it doesn't matter that there's this level of incompetence in them. They have the numbers and they have the structures in place to be able to still take advantage of people and to steamroll them literally. Like, and so it doesn't matter that they have this level of people not really knowing what they're doing, because there's enough of them to step into the structure is made to account for that. Like, it doesn't, they can be incompetent. There's 80 other people that can do the same job, because it's not about the individual people, it's about thing as a whole, and like how it operates. And like, you lose that by not including an episode like at all. There's literally nothing in this episode is in the live action.
I cannot recall in the live action where we truly see any of the Fire Nation actually doing what the Fire Nation is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, like the close. I mean, the close. No, because that's not even the Fire Nation. I was thinking about the Iroh being captured and like taken away, but that's Earth. Those are Earth Kingdom soldiers.
That's the Earth Kingdom. Yeah.
Like, that's not. So that's what? Not, like it makes the Earth Kingdom look worse than the Fire Nation actually, because they're like, even though like, well, because, and that's because you're like we
see Zuko, but
yeah. But the thing is, you're supposed, like Zuko and Iroh are supposed to be sympathetic characters ultimately for the audience, and like they're building that up already in the first season of the live action series. And so by seeing them like imprisoned, and you want them to be broken out, and so then it paints the Earth Kingdom soldiers in a more negative light, which is not how that's supposed to go. Like, you're not. It makes them look worse than the Fire Nation by comparison, because we see them do things to the characters that we care about in a bad way. Like,
yes. Oh, and then like you see why they have to intervene. But I also like showing this too. It builds up to show that just by cutting, like if you cut off the head of the snake, there's still, though I guess I don't know what that. There's like an analogy with that, but
the Hydra.
The Hydra, yes.
Yeah, how there's always going to be more. Yeah.
There's always going to be more here, and there's like they have so many things in place, and we see that just by one victory doesn't mean they won the war. They won that battle, but they have a whole war to win.
Well, I mean, and like they even talk about it at the end of the episode where they're like sailing away. They're like, we're going to go back and like take our village back, right? And it's like, okay, or like all of their respective villages, you know. And it's like, well, they like got off the rig, but that's just the first step. And also,
that's just the first step.
One of like hundreds of things like this. Like we see later on, I can't remember exactly. I feel like it's in book 2, but the Painted Lady episode.
Yes.
Of course, we'll get there. But that's another example of like.
Get there.
That should be. We should make shirts.
That's we're gonna make T-shirts, guys. we'll get there.
We'll get there though. But like that's another example of the type of system and level of oppression that they have in place, where like they just are finding every way that they possibly can to exploit and demean and demoralize. And it's just and like they're able to do that because they've been doing it for 100 years at this point. Like it's a war that's been going on for so long.
They have the power.
And they've so decisively established themselves in this position where like, yeah, they can just keep doing this and doing it without resistance, essentially, because there's not enough people to resist, or the people don't think there's any chance for resisting. And of course it plays into the fact that like the Avatar has been gone for 100 years, so like that does a lot to morale. And so it's just like all of these things that you miss. I feel like the biggest thing that you miss by not including this is that just like seeing the Fire Nation operate on this level, on this scale. It's not there in the live action show. In the live action series, I don't see them as this imperial force, this imperial like superpower, which is what they are.
Hey, Aspect listener, enjoying the show?
Then be sure to subscribe here on The Aspect so you never miss an episode.
And check out more episodes and clips on our playlist here.
Thanks so much for watching, and...
Lameo Hot Man.